Hey, welcome to Fuel Week 3. We are here studying and exploring the life of Moses. Again, I've bit off more than I can chew to try to explain or try to really do justice to Moses' life in just 4 short weeks. But we're trying, and we're doing well at that, I think. So, hey, here's a question for you. Have you ever had your back up against the wall? Have you ever been stuck in a corner with seemingly no good option? I read the story on NPR of a guy named Charles Johnson who was a teenage high school basketball star, and he never learned to read. And so the teachers, because he was so good at basketball, just kept putting him through the grades. He got all the way, he graduated through high school, and he was illiterate. He did not know how to read. Several years later, with a wife and family to support, he found himself out of work. Somehow, he got into the job of long haul or over-the-road trucking. Somehow he passed the driving test. Somehow, by eeny, meeny, miny, mo, he passed the multiple choice test to get his CDL or whatever it is. This guy's illiterate. And then he finds himself with the bill of lading, driving down the highway in an 18-wheeler, not knowing what the bill of lading is saying, and having gauges blinking red and not able to read what they are. His back was against the wall. What was he supposed to do? Phone into the boss? By the way, I can't read. How did he get that far? Was he supposed to just quit and let his family go hungry? He had his back up against the wall. He had really no good option at that time. Maybe some are here today in this room that feel like that you have your back up against the wall, that you're stuck in a corner and there doesn't seem to be any good option. Does anybody feel that way? Maybe it's vocational. Maybe things at work are just really hard right now. Maybe you're confronted with choices, and neither one of them is a very good choice, and you have to make it. Maybe you're the victim of some choices, and you've been told that your job is no longer necessary, that you no longer have it, and we're sorry, but you're going to have to find something else. Maybe you're in a corner relationally. Maybe somebody's rejected you. Maybe somebody said that they don't want to be your friend anymore. Maybe, like what happened to me in 8th grade, somebody said they're going to beat you up at the locker the next day. Have you ever been stuck in a corner? Maybe medically you're in a corner. Maybe there's something wrong, you don't know what it is. Or maybe the doctor's told you what it is, and it requires no real good choice. Nothing that's going to be an easy fix. I'm betting that there's some in this room today that are stuck in some kind of corner, that are feeling trapped, that are feeling all the pressure and the weight of the world, at least their own little world, is coming down on them, and there's no good choice. And you're afraid. This is one of those messages today where I know the truth of the Bible. I can speak the truth of the Bible, hopefully, but it doesn't always take residence in me. And so I want to just take a moment, if you would, pray with me. God, I thank you for your truth. I thank you for your grace. I thank you for your supernatural ability and all the things that you've done over the thousands of years with your people to show that you can be trusted, to show that we don't have to be afraid. But God, you know I struggle with this, and you know others in this room struggle with this too. I pray that you would help us, those that are stuck in corners with their backs up against the wall, that you would teach us something, that you would guide us, that you would comfort us, and that you would remind us that you're above all of this and that you do care. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're in the middle of the Exodus. We're really in Exodus chapter 13 and 14 if you've been reading along. If you were here last week, you know that God had to deal with Pharaoh pretty severely, right? Pharaoh would not listen to Moses' request, and so these 10 plagues come. The last one is the plague of death on the firstborn, but those who painted the blood on the doorposts, and we painted some pretend blood on the doorpost over there last week. Those would be saved. Those would be passed over. And we know that that's a foreshadowing of what Jesus did 2,000 years ago. That if we paint his blood, if we take his sacrifice into ourselves, that we'll be passed over as well. So the Israelites are leaving Egypt. They've been waiting 430 years to get out of slavery. Generation after generation after generation had heard the promise that they would leave and died just hearing that promise, generation after generation. Now this is it, the big night. They're out of here. Between 1 million and 2 million people are marching out of Egypt, and God is taking them where? He's taking them to the promised land. Now this story that we're hitting today is probably one of the most well-known biblical accounts. I mean, everybody's heard of this, from the flannel boards back in kindergarten and in Sunday school. And I just want to draw out the picture of the situation, okay? And this is about the biggest marker I've ever seen. This is the Mediterranean Sea, okay? This is the River Nile. This right here is Egypt. This is the starting point, okay? Point A is where the people are. This is where the promised land. This is point B, okay? This is the scenario, the Mediterranean. There's a few roads that are going this way, okay? There's also this big body of water down here called the Red Sea, and it's got these two little arms off of it, and it's really big, and this is the Red Sea. So Moses punches into his MapQuest computer program, how do I get from point A to point B? Everybody knows the quickest distance between 2 points is what? Have you guys not read the story? Instead of having him do the straight line, God says, no, no, no. If you go this way, there's too much stuff on this road. The Philistines are there, and they're going to want to fight you. And you guys aren't ready for fighting because you've just been slaves. You can't go this way. Here's what I'm going to have you do. I'm going to have you wander off this way. Go south. I want you to keep going. Keep going. And remember, they've got God's GPS at the time. They've got a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. That is their GPS. Follow the cloud. Follow the fire. Pretty easy, right? So God has them going completely out of the way. This makes no sense, right? He's got them going all the way down here, and he has them do this crazy little loop. He has them kind of go one way and then turn back and come back, and they're stuck at this point right here. Exodus 14, verses 1 through 3. Then the Lord says to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi Hahiroth between Migdol and the sea. That's this point right here. Okay, at least that's what historians think. That's where it is. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around in the land in confusion, and that they're hemmed in by the desert. Okay? God's people are looking like fools. The pillar and the cloud aren't working. There's a glitch in the GPS. Something is wrong. Exodus 14, verse 4. God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. Okay, Pharaoh's now coming alongside. He's coming behind. He's about to overtake them. But I will gain glory for myself, God says, through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. They made this loop. They turned back. They were sitting ducks, stuck between the desert and stuck between the sea with seemingly no place to go. Their back was up against the wall. They were stuck in a corner. They were in serious trouble. Audience participation time. When your back is against the wall, when you are stuck in a corner, we are genetically predisposed to one of two things, right? Either fight, right? Or flight, right? Raise your hand. Who's disposed towards fighting? Okay. Now honesty here. Who's disposed towards flight, running away? Some people did not raise their hands. You want to do it again? Who wants to fight? Who wants flight? Who wants both? Who wants neither? Actually, neither is kind of the right answer, isn't it? So everybody was wrong, except for those that didn't raise their hand. The story continues, Exodus 14, verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, here he is, he's bearing down. He's got him right where he wants him. The Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. Listen to this. They were terrified and cried out to God. They said to Moses, I love this, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. This is one of my most favorite little interactions in the Scripture. And it brings us, because Halloween is right around the corner, the first thing that I want to get to on your talk notes is the 5 errors of terror. Whoa. The 5 errors of terror that these people were signaling that they were struggling with. The first one, and if you have the blanks in there and they'll come up on the screen, the first one is this: poor decisions. How many of you guys make really good decisions when you're terrified and scared? Anybody? Yeah, we make horrible decisions when we're scared, right? Growing up, I watched a lot of the Halloween movies. Do you guys remember the Halloween movies? There's like 37 of them. With Jason, with the hockey goalie mask. There would always be like some co-eds that went to the lake cabin for the weekend. Jason would come out of the woods and basically kill them all, right? Every episode, or every movie, every version, seemed to have somebody who would run into the kitchen and get the car keys, right? Do you guys remember this? They'd get the car keys, and you're thinking, that's not a good idea. Okay? Then they'd grab the car keys, they'd run out to the car, they'd fumble with the car keys. They'd try to pick them up and find 1 out of 100 on the ring and trying to get it in the door, right? And they'd get in the door, and then they'd get inside the car, and they'd find the one to start it up, and it wouldn't start, right? And the car was always like a convertible, right? And Jason would just slash through the roof, right? And I'm thinking the whole time, bad decision. Just run down the road and get out of there. Don't try, anything else. Don't make a bad decision trying to get the keys to the car. The second error of terror is imagining the worst. How many of you guys are good at worst case scenarios? I bet I'm better at you than this. We should have a worst case scenario off at the end of church today, and we could just see who can kind of imagine more destructive things happening. They imagined death, right? They imagined that they were going to die. It said that did you lead us here to die in the desert? We're going to die. The worst possible thing ever is going to happen. And I just want to take a side note here for a second. How many people think Pharaoh was going to kill him? Yeah, none of you. He was getting his slave labor back. That's all he was doing. He wasn't going to kill the people. I think he had kind of like a hangover the next day. He was like, I did what? Last night I let him go? How are we going to make the bricks? How are we going to build the... I think he was just trying to get his labor back. Third error of terror is sarcasm. You guys hear the sarcasm in those verses? Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert? What, there just wasn't enough ground to bury us all back there? You had to bring us all the way out here? Sarcasm comes from the Greek word sarkasmos, which means this: to tear flesh. Like a biting, tearing of flesh. If you're honest, wouldn't you admit that some of the worst wounds that you've experienced have come through sarcastic remarks? And maybe some of the worst wounds you've inflicted on others through sarcasm as well. The fourth error of terror is reinventing history. Is there anybody good at this one? Reinventing history? It wasn't that bad back in Egypt, Moses. We really liked it. Right? We told you, in fact, leave us alone. We really like it here. Making bricks is our favorite thing to do. We love Pharaoh. Like, why? Like, do you ever do that in your life? Reinvent history? Especially when you're in a tough situation? Lastly, the fifth error of terror is this, that it's a waste of energy. Jesus says in Matthew 6:27, who by worrying can add a single day to their life? Any good worriers here? Okay, again, I want to have a worry off with you after the service. I could lose days, years of my life possibly, just in the things that I worry about sometimes. So those are the 5 errors of terror. This is what Moses, as the leader, is dealing with. The people are going like crazy. They're terrified, and they should have been. It was a scary situation, no doubt. They didn't know Pharaoh wasn't probably going to kill them. They're terrified. Moses comes back and answers the people. Verse 13. Moses answered the people. Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. Within these verses, we see Moses' 3-part plan for eradicating fear, for operating under terror. He's got a 3-part plan kind of nested in these verses here. And the first one is this: fear not. That makes it all better, right? When somebody says, don't be afraid, that makes it better, right? For you, maybe it does. I hate it. And I think as people of God and people of Euzoa Bible Church, we need to get better at this kind of thing, of being able to talk about fears, don't we? Instead of just having that kind of pat response, oh, don't be afraid. Don't worry, right? Isn't that kind of like what we say around here? No worries, right? It's going to be okay. Don't worry about it. Can we tame fear? Do you feel like you can tame fear? Can you get better at handling your fears? I've probably told this story before, but I was telling this to my kids, and they wanted to hear it like 18 times over the last 2 days. When I was about 15 years old, I was living in Missouri. My neighbors to the back of our yard had about 20 acres. They had horses, all this kind of stuff. And one day, my neighbor friend comes over, and he's got a horse with him, and he says, hey, Chris, you want to ride the horse? I'm not much of an equestrian. Okay? He gets me on this horse, and I'm a little bit afraid. I'm actually quite afraid. It's a big animal. Horses are big. Did you guys know this? They're really large. And so I'm sitting on this horse, and we're just walking. We're just walking towards the back field, and I've got the reins. And the horse is all of a sudden going to the left, and I'm pulling him back to the right. He keeps going left. I'm pulling him to the right. He's not listening to me. He takes me under a tree that's only about 6 inches taller than him. I fall to the ground, terrified the whole time, and now terrified and mad and ashamed and all of that kind of stuff. My friend's dad watches the whole thing, runs out of the house, comes over to me, grabs the horse, brings me, and he says, you got to get back on that horse. I'm like, what? You got to get back on that horse. I'm going to help you up. So I get back up on the horse. You know why he did that? To help me tame my fear of the horse. It worked a little bit. I think also he did that to show the horse that you just can't kind of do that kind of stuff to people. It's not right. Can we tame fear? Think of it this way. There's professional kind of fear out there, isn't there? There's fearful, terrifying areas that people work in a professional manner. Like the stock market could be crashing. People could be jumping out of windows. The screens are red. The blood is in the streets. And there's guys that have a plan, that know how to handle that kind of fear, that are waiting to push the sell or the buy buttons just in the nick of time because they've experienced this before. They know what to expect. It's still scary, but they're waiting. They're sticking to their plan. You guys remember the hero on the Hudson? January 15th of 2009, I think it was. Chesley Sullenberger, he goes by Sully, was flying flight U.S. Air Flight 1549, taking off out of New York when what happened? His plane went through a flock of birds, knocked the engines out, and here is Sully up in the air with the plane that's dead weight that can maybe coast a little bit of a distance, and millions of people in the city all around him. Here's what Sully says. He says, at that moment, it was the worst, sickening, pit of your stomach, falling through the floor kind of feeling. He was terrified. But here's what also he says. For 42 years, his airline career, his pilot career was 42 years long, starting in the military, going into commercial aviation. For 42 years, he made small deposits into a bank account. These small deposits were training and education and time in a simulator so that he could make one big withdrawal on that particular day. Make no mistake, he was afraid, but he had tamed his fear. I know there are some in this room. This is terrifying to me. That you have maybe 3 kids under the age of 5 or 6. If you put those 3 kids with me, I would be terrified. I wouldn't know what to do. I would scream running, and you guys handle it with ease because you've done it, because you're a professional at that. You're able to tame that kind of fear. That's professional fear, though. What about spiritual fear? Does anybody struggle with spiritual fear? Paul in 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5 says this. He says, we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. That word captive there means to put in jail, basically. Imagine taking your fearful thoughts and putting them into jail with Jesus. That Jesus would be there in that cell with you, comforting you, telling you, hey, listen, man, I got this covered. I'm with you. I love you. I care for you. Taking every one of those thoughts captive, running it through the story and the narrative of this book and what God has been doing. Take your fearful thoughts captive to that. 2 Timothy 1, verse 7 says this, for God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. That word timidity, the Greek word is dalia. It means also fear or cowardice. He's saying, God didn't give you a spirit of fear or cowardice. But by his Spirit, there's power. And that you can have self-discipline. And you can actually tame fear. Fear not is one of the most mentioned things in the Bible, right? Here you have little Mary, the little virgin. She's engaged to this guy, Joseph. And then she gets this news, you're going to have a baby. It's not Joseph's, it's God's. I mean, that's a whole other thing right there, right? But like, your life, Mary's thinking her life is in jeopardy. Her reputation, her engagement, all of those things are now on the line because of something that God was asking her to do. And what does the angel say? Fear not. She gives birth to the Savior. Jesus is in a boat with his boys hanging out, right? A storm comes in. The boat's rocking. The rain's coming down. These guys are scared, rightly so, right? I'm sure lots of people were lost in accidents at sea back then. And what does Jesus say? Fear not. I'm here. You don't have to worry. At the empty tomb, Mary Magdalene shows up to help anoint the body of Jesus. She's there. The body's gone. She's probably engaged in those 5 errors of terror going, oh my gosh, what has happened? They're dragging his body through the streets. She's probably imagining the worst. And what does the angel say? Fear not. You know, he's risen. He's resurrected. You'll see him in just a little bit. I know that oftentimes as we engage each other and as people have the courage and the authenticity to share the things that they're afraid of, I know oftentimes we think we mean well when we say, hey, don't be afraid, don't worry about it, right? But I think there's a couple of things that we can do to kind of help people who are in that fearful situation. There's things that we can do to help people tame their fear. One of them is just like not telling them too much just to not be afraid. You know what I'm saying? Don't just say, don't be afraid. Don't worry. In fact, do the opposite. You could say, tell me about your fear. In fact, tell me what's the worst case scenario of what you're going through right now. What's the absolute worst thing that could happen to you right now? And by sharing that with your friend, I think you can help right-size. You can help bring that fear out and explore it to realize that you're probably making one of those 5 errors of terror in there. It's probably not as bad as you thought. And if you know Christ, what's the worst thing that can happen to you in your life? My friend Dave Maloney always says this to me. Worst thing that can happen is I'm going to die and go to heaven. Another thing that you can do. I don't know if you guys like to journal. I journal. I've got about 5 or 6 moleskins over the year. I can go back. I write in it every 3 or 4 days. I can go back and look at times when I was scared, times when I was terrified, times when I was going through a difficult thing, and then hopefully within a few pages, sometimes it's a few journals later, I could see where God has taken care of the situation. God has made it better. God has shown up. Looking back on it, I didn't need to stress the way that I did. But man, I'm good at that. Fear not. We can tame fear. The second part of Paul's action plan is this: stand firm. Has anybody ever been confronted with a problem where the thing that you do to try to fix the problem actually makes the problem worse? Have you ever had that? If you want me to do any home projects, that's kind of my story doing home projects. Whatever project I will do will require 3 or 4 more projects just to fix it. It's true. Anybody like The Far Side, Gary Larson? Here's a good example. Brett Romela found this for me. Can everybody see that? It takes a while with Gary Larson, doesn't it? How a fire started in the fishbowl, who knows? But the worst thing that you could do is get out of the fishbowl, right? I think Moses is saying to the people here, when he says stand firm, he says don't run. Don't run like chickens. You're going to make the problem worse if you guys scatter yourself all over the place and run like you're afraid. Stand up like you're God's people. Stand into this. Stand firm. Here's some quotes. Well, 2 quotes and a Bible verse. I love this one by Albert Mohler. Don't just do something. Stand there. Let me say that again. Don't just do something. Stand there. Billy Graham, courage is contagious. When a brave man takes a stand, the spines of others are strengthened. Moses stood there, didn't he? Stand firm, people. We're not running. We're not running. Psalm 27:14. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and do what? Wait for the Lord. Your back's against the wall. Wait for him. So that's part 2 of Moses' plan, stand firm. Part 3, the final thing, is this: expect God to act. Expect God to act. Don't expect annihilation to come. Don't expect that he's not really hearing you. Bill Hybels says this, I love it. When you are out of room and out of options, your true theology is revealed. When you are out of room and out of options, what you think about God, what you believe about his character and his promises and his love for you is truly revealed at that point. See, when you're in a situation like this, when you're stuck in a corner, you have 2 kind of basic options, don't you? One is this: heaven doesn't care. God doesn't see. God doesn't care. I'm in this by myself. Or the second option: at least I know God is with me. I can really actually experience the presence of God in a painful, difficult, stuck kind of situation. Those are your 2 basic options. You can trust God, or you can bail on God. The whole thing was a farce from the beginning. He doesn't really care. He doesn't really come through for his people. I believe this: God tends to wait on your declaration of faith before he takes decisive action. That God waits for our declaration of faith. What do we really think about him? Let him know in those situations before he takes decisive action. That's what was going on here. The people had to stand firm, not run. In fact, they had to turn their back on the opposing army, facing the sea. Moses had to grab this little staff and hold it. I mean, doesn't that sound ridiculous? I'm going to stand there above the sea and hold my staff out. They're coming to get us from behind. That's what he had to do. Micah 7, verse 7, the prophet Micah says this, "But as for me, I will watch expectantly for the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me." Take heart in that. The third part is expecting God to act. You know, I love to ask the question, why? I know it drives some of you guys insane. I know that. I love it. Not to drive you guys insane, but just to explore the question of why. My question is, why was any of this happening? Why was this going on? Remember this. God had his own people have been enslaved for 430 years. They're now coming out. They're coming out of Egypt as his people. Okay, other people weren't God's people. They were his people. And he was molding them. He was forming them. He was building his people. That's the last blank on your notes there. God was building his people. Now, if you're married in this room, or if you're single in this room, we probably all share something similar. Did anybody have a list of what they wanted their spouse to be like back when they were single? Does anybody have that now? I mean, it's a good exercise. It really is. Of all the things that you were looking for in a spouse, I wrote a few things down. I didn't share these with my wife beforehand. My spouse, I want her to be blonde hair and green-eyed. I want her to like mountain biking. Okay? Not just like big roads. Some single-track action is what I want with my wife. Okay? I want her to play soccer because I love soccer. I want her to ski. In fact, I don't want her just to ski. I want her to telly because that's the way real skiers do it. I wanted her to like the same restaurants that I liked. I wanted her to like the same activities that I liked. I wanted her to be a good cook. I wanted her to be fit. I wanted her to be good with kids. I wanted her to take long walks on the beach. I didn't really. I just throw that one in there because that might help bring more people in. Oh, by the way, I wanted her to be a woman of faith. I wanted her to know God. I wanted her to have placed her trust in Jesus Christ. Now, be honest here. Those of you that have the list currently or had the list in the past, year after year, what happens? Right? You knock some stuff off the list, don't you? Yep. Skier, it's not that big of a deal. She can maybe even snowboard. I don't know. The thing about mountain biking, actually golf was on my list at one point in time. I'm like, yeah, no, I think that's just a guy thing. Just keep that for me and my guys. You know what I'm saying? Your list gets smaller over time. And I don't think it's necessarily because you're giving up, but I think over time we start to realize what's really important, don't we? For me, it was the last thing on the list. That she be a woman of faith. That she know Jesus Christ. That she understands the activity of God throughout this book, the Bible. And you know what? She's a great cook, and she's good with kids, and she's a great runner too. But the main thing is the main thing, that she would be a person of faith. God is building his people. He's making them go through all of this stuff. See, God's list is not like our list. He doesn't care if they're strong, if they're smart, if they're courageous, if they're the best fighters, or if they're the best runners, or any of that. He's looking for one thing, isn't he? Will they be people of faith? Why take the long way? He's making his people be a people of faith. Why come all the way down here and turn back in a seemingly stupid move, looking like idiots? Why? To build people of faith. Pharaoh's bearing down. Are they supposed to fight back? Are they supposed to manufacture some weapons and fight Pharaoh head on? No. Why? Because God is building a people of faith. He's got them stuck between the desert and the sea. Why? Because he's building a people of faith. The kind of faith that will last for thousands of years, that we will read about, that we will study, that we will hopefully emulate and participate in like ways, so that we can be God's people of faith too. For thousands of years, this defined their faith, and it should define our faith too. The story, this part of it anyways, wraps up in Exodus 14, verse 29. I'm switching to the New Living Translation for those of you that are keeping track. But the people of Israel had walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground. God had made a way, right? Because they didn't fear, because they stood firm, and because they expected God to act. They walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground as the water stood up like a wall on both sides. That is how the Lord rescued Israel from the hand of the Egyptians that day. And the Israelites saw the bodies of the Egyptians washed up on the seashore, annihilating the enemy. Verse 31. When the people of Israel, God's people, saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him. And get this last sentence. They put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. All of this so that people would put their faith in this God that was leading them out of slavery into a prosperous life. So have you thought about what I said at the beginning? Where are you stuck in a corner? Where is your back up against the wall? Where do you seemingly have no good option? And what will you do about it? I want to pray, and I want to give you time here to think that through and to maybe even take a small action step today. Let's bow our heads. Let's keep them down low, and let's pray.